welcome. Welcome to all of you, our friends of the Interfaith Dialogue Association. I welcome you all to this very special event, to the 9th Annual World Religions Conference titled Religion and Science, Exploring a Partnership. I would like to bring your attention to the program now. If you look at, turn a few pages, maybe 2 pages over, program at a glance, session 1. It should say 3 p.m. to 3:50 p.m. instead of 3 to 4:40. It's 3 to 3:50. You could make that correction, please. Also, I would like to especially greet our Jewish friends today who have not been a part of our conference in previous years because of Saturday, because of Shabbat. This year, we have our Jewish friends present among us, and it is indeed heartwarming and delightful. And we will end with Havdalah service, which is the separation of Shabbat, the end of Shabbat, separation of Shabbat from the regular week. And it will be a very special ceremony, and I hope you all stay to share it with us. And I now ask Fred Stella, President of the Interfaith Dialogue Association.
Thank you very much. It's just wonderful to see such a room filled with joyous people of spirit. I hope this will be an encouraging and uplifting day. And we ask everyone to, from whatever tradition that you are in, to expand, to enjoy the company of others. I know that one time someone was saying, if Richard Nixon was on a desert island, whom would he rather have as company? If he had one person to share that experience with, would he have just a regular old American with him, or would he want Fidel Castro? And there's a notion that, well, maybe he would rather have somebody who is of a completely different philosophy, but still charged with the same dynamism and conviction about politics. And so here we are, a mixture of so many different religions. And I know that I myself would much rather spend time with someone who has deep and holy convictions of their tradition, as opposed to someone who shared my beliefs, but only nominally. And we have that wonderful venue today to experience that, being with people of spirit. And I hope that if nothing else today, I hope if you learn nothing, at least if you can make a friend or an acquaintance of many people here, I'm sure your life will be enriched. I hope that if you have registered, you may have checked a little box. If you haven't checked that box to be on our mailing list, you can go up and put your name down at the registration table in the other building. We want to be able to get in touch with you if we have more. We do several times a year have certain forums, conferences, discussion groups. We'd like for you to be aware of those. Another reminder that the Interfaith Dialogue Association has a radio program that is broadcast on WGVU. It's called Common Threads, and it's broadcast 3 times a week, the same program 3 times a week. 7 in the mornings on Sunday, later that afternoon at 3:30, and then on Tuesday evenings at 8 o'clock. That's WGVU 1480 AM. The Sunday show in the morning is also broadcast on the FM 88.5. And you know something? As president of the Interfaith Dialogue Association, I have the esteemed honor of saying I had almost nothing to do with this conference. It was pretty easy for me. I made a couple phone calls, responded to a couple of emails, didn't go to one meeting. I like that. But I would like to acknowledge all of the people who really spend just hours and hours, days, putting this together. And I would like each and every one of the people that I call to please stand, and once they have all stood, let us show our appreciation. The coordinators, Mary Clark Kaiser, Ghazala Munir, Russell Rhodes, Lisa Mitchell, Debbie Aliyah, Elaine Wahab, Joan Start, Madhuri Acharya is not here, I know, Bill Buchanan, Herb Reynolds, John Schneider, Lynn Simon, Swami Tapasananda, and we also want to give special thanks again to Dr. John Schneider. We also express our appreciation to the members of the Conference Planning Committee and many others who contributed to the planning of this event. And finally, we wish to acknowledge the continuing support of our co-sponsors and associate co-sponsors, which are listed in the program. So thank you. God bless every one of you. I would now like to turn things over to Joel Beversley.
Good morning, afternoon, isn't it? I have the honor of introducing our keynote speaker. Professor Dr. Brother Wayne Teasdale comes from Chicago in recent years. Before that, the East Coast and India and other parts of the world. Brother Wayne Teasdale is a lay monk who combines the traditions of Christianity, his faith tradition, with teachings of Hinduism and Buddhism and other traditions as a Christian sannyasi, a Christian renunciate. He is an activist and teacher in building common ground between religions. Teasdale serves on the board of trustees of the Council for a Parliament of the World's Religions, and was very active in the 1993 Parliament in Chicago, and the one which is coming up in 4 weeks, less than 4 weeks, in Cape Town, South Africa. He's a member of Monastic Interreligious Dialogue and helped draft their Universal Declaration on Nonviolence with many important leaders, including Thomas Keating and the Dalai Lama as co-signers. He's an adjunct professor at DePaul University, Columbia College, and Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, and coordinator of the Bede Griffiths International Trust. Wayne spent years corresponding and living and studying with Bede Griffiths, who founded Christian Action in India. Wayne is co-editor of a book titled The Community of Religions with George Cairns. That book is reflections on the 1993 Parliament and thoughts about the future of the interfaith movement and the future of religion. Also author of 2 books on mysticism and dozens of articles on mysticism and religion. He holds an MA in philosophy from St. Joseph College, a PhD in theology from Fordham University. Wayne is many other things to other people. A retreat master, is a contemplative and teacher of contemplation, especially centering prayer. As I mentioned, he was a student of Bede Griffiths, also guided by Father Thomas Keating, who leads an interfaith dialogue that's been going on for many years in Snowmass. He's a friend of the family of the Dalai Lama and of the Dalai Lama, and just returned from a program in Dharamsala called the Synthesis Dialogues, a participant in which was the Dalai Lama. Wayne's a visionary for the interfaith movement, and he's taught me a great deal. He's been an inspiring and warm friend to me and to the interfaith movement. He's been in Grand Rapids at 2 other conferences of ours. He's a leader and advisor to the young adults involved with the Parliament of the World's Religions, the Next Generation Youth, of the Next Generation program, which has a big role with young adults and youth in Chicago and in Cape Town. And he's a wonderful, warm person and friend. I'd like to introduce Brother Wayne Teasdale.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back in Grand Rapids. Can you all hear me? Yesterday, I was talking to Joel and Russ Rhodes over here, and some other friends, about making a comment about the decline of the hold of science on culture. And this is something not readily perceptible by people, because science has an enormous prestige and its record of success has been great, but it has been clouded somewhat by the ambiguity over scientists creating atomic bombs and weapons of mass destruction. But in recent years, when I was growing up, science had an incredible hold on culture. And this attitude of scientism was found everywhere among popularizers of science. And some scientists, in more recent times, like a person like Carl Sagan, and a new one is on the horizon, is what's his name? Brian Greene, The Elegant Universe. And scientism is this kind of superficial view that science has all the answers, and only the scientific method can give us truth. And, you know, when I hear that view, I'm amazed at the childish nature of that. And I'm reminded of something Raman Panikar, a great cross-cultural thinker, once remarked at a scientific conference. He has a doctorate in chemistry and philosophy and theology. And he was listening to, I think it was a biologist giving an impassioned talk on what we knew today. And he said, this biologist said, today we know, and Panikar just shot back, yes, but what about tomorrow? That scientific truth, in small t and in quotation marks, is very changeable. And therefore, to call it truth is, I think, maybe a misnomer. To call it a particular theory or a particular view that we hold today based on the best information we have. But since it is constantly changing, to call it truth, I think, is kind of problematic. Anyway, a big question is, what can religion and science, and spirituality and science, can they not only coexist, but have a warm relationship and contribute to the one great enterprise of seeking the truth and contributing a vision that is positive for the future of humanity, the world, other species, as part of a new civilization? Can they work together and not descend into polemics and the old antagonism? And so I'd like to address that. And this talk, you could name Religion, Spirituality, and Science, an integral vision. An integral vision. The other day, maybe, well, a week and a half or so ago, I was listening to Science Friday on NPR, and they were interviewing Ira Plato, the host of the show. Did you listen to that show? He was interviewing Amit Zaleo. I think he's Egyptian, and he's the Nobel laureate in chemistry this year. And I think he is a very religious or spiritual person, and a very gentle soul and articulate, but quiet. And during the call-in period, some woman from the Midwest called in and asked him, well, what about God? Where does the Creator fit in? And he said something like, well, I don't see this as a problem. You know, the whole matter of the divine, it's a personal concern for scientists. It's not something that scientists are concerned about in their theories. But he said that, you know, there really is not a conflict between science and religion. There is no basis for conflict. He said, I don't see a conflict. I don't really see a contradiction. So that's something that we need to evolve beyond. And I think this is quite true. I think this is quite true, that there really isn't a conflict. And of course, I come from a Catholic tradition, and in our biblical studies, we've been taught to nuance the scriptural text, and there's a long tradition in the Catholic and Orthodox churches of the fourfold sense of Scripture and the sensus plenior, the fuller sense of Scripture. And I'm reminded how Jesus himself said, the letter kills while the Spirit frees. And if you apply that principle to Genesis, I don't see a problem, because I think the real key there, the key insight of Genesis, one of the key insights is that the divine exists and God, the divine, has created the universe. And how that is done, I think, is beside the point. You know what I'm saying? What means the divine uses is beside the point. I think that what the point that the biblical writers are trying to get across is that there is a source of the universe, and the source is responsible for us. God is that source. And I think that evolution is one way to talk about how the divine has done it. I think evolution cries out that it is a propulsive process when you really think it through. And that has been elaborated very profoundly by Teilhard de Chardin. I think he was the first evolutionary thinker to finish Darwin's theory, to show the implications of Darwin's theory. And I don't think anyone in evolutionary theory has had a deeper grasp of evolution and the implications of it theologically than Teilhard de Chardin. So I don't really see a problem reconciling the Genesis account and the theory of evolution. Now, Amit Zawell's comment on Science Friday reflects a spirit of congeniality that is developing between the world of religion and spirituality and the world of science, which, of course, is the same world, isn't it, that we're all in, hopefully. And it's very interesting. I read a statistic a couple of years ago. I did this, I did 2 forums on science and spirituality with Eric Carlson, who is an astrophysicist, astronomer from Chicago, and Cliff Matthews, who is a specialist in origin of life. He's a biochemist, both of them mystics. And Cliff, the biochemist, who reads everything and goes to every conference on this subject, and there are a plethora of them. He presented an article in a scientific journal which said 71% of scientists believe in God, 40% in the biblical God, another 31% in a kind of Spinozian, first principle, unmoved movement, that there's a source. It's pretty interesting that scientists are like that. And the other thing is that the situation for so many decades has been one of what I call epistemological schizophrenia. That, epistemology is the branch that studies knowing. What can we know? Can we know anything? Well, what can we know? And how do we know? What are the conditions for knowing? And what kind of objects can we know? That's epistemology. And then schizophrenia, because with the emphasis on the scientific method as the primary method for knowing truth, this has been held by some scientists and people who have been proponents of scientism, like Carl Sagan and Brian Greene and others. Although that is a waning movement, it's shrinking, that with that emphasis on the scientific method, you had scientists who were brilliant theorists in their field and researchers in physics, in mathematics, in astronomy, cosmology, biology, botany, everything you can imagine, and contributing in very substantial ways to their field and to knowledge in general. And yet, they had to cut away another half of their experience. This is the schizophrenic part. That they had very strong intuitive abilities, and of course all the great discoveries in science and in philosophy and literature, music, come from that intuitive dimension, which is a mystical faculty. Einstein himself talks about that. Well, so they knew that there were other ways of knowing that were just as valid, or perhaps more so. Okay? So we had this situation of epistemological schizophrenia. That there were these other ways of knowing, even in the very scientists that are doing their science. They know there are other ways, but they're not allowed to admit this. Well, I think that ground is shifting. And as I was saying, if you go back 20 to 25 years ago, science had a much stronger hold on culture than it has today. Now, I'm talking about the matter of people's understanding of ways of knowing. That 25 years ago, it was a bit easier to try and emphasize the scientific method as the only way, and there was a lot of support among some of in intellectual and scientific circles, philosophical circles. But that is declining rapidly because people are getting more educated, more sophisticated, they're trusting their experience more, and they are themselves knowing in these other ways, and so they know that there's more than one way. So on the one hand, science has a very strong role in society, in the world. On the other hand, it's no longer monolithic. And secondly, there are a number of great scientists who are speaking of the end of science. Science is going to come to an end. And I've heard this a number of times this year. I heard it in February by one of the great cosmologists, astrophysicists, mathematicians, at this wonderful conference on cosmology, astrocosmology. It was called the Pritzker Symposium on the Status of Inflationary Cosmology. The notion of the universe is expanding. There were 200 cosmologists there, including Pebbles and Stephen Hawking and Martin Rees and others. And I was astounded, because that was the first time I heard that notion that science may be coming to an end. So, and I heard it again actually during the Nobel hour that news conference. One of the scientists who had won the Nobel Prize mentioned that possibility that science will come to an end. So it has declined. And then Rupert Sheldrake remarked to me in that same year that Pete Griffiths came to Grand Rapids and to the Professor Institute and gave that retreat at the Ganges Monastery, the Dhamma Center. Earlier, a number of us were with him in California, and in Big Sur, Rupert Sheldrake goes there a lot, and he's known us for several years. He wrote his first book called The Beats Ashram, the New Science of Life. And he's a kind of, to the scientific establishment, he's a scientific heretic. And the reason he's a heretic is he's really trying to democratize science. And by that I mean he's reminding orthodox science of a number of questions that arise from ordinary human experience that don't fit into the dominant scientific model. Like, for instance, your pet's knowing when you're coming home, even if you vary the time you're coming and the means of conveyance, the pets infallibly know. There's some sort of link. There's non-local knowing going on. And this does not fit into a materialist, I would call it naive materialism, a naive materialist view, a reductionist view of reality. which wants to see the mind, consciousness, as just a byproduct of matter, and whatever matter could possibly be, you know, an epiphenomenal to the material world. It doesn't fit in. These kinds of parapsychological experiences, mystical experiences don't fit in. Love doesn't fit in. You can't explain love. I mean, some parts of it you can, but you can't explain that. And so he has so enraged some of these old Orthodox scientists, and they're dying off pretty quickly, that the editor of the journal Nature, the British journal Nature, the two great scientific journals, well, there are many, but two that are really, really good are Nature and another one called Science. So in the journal Nature, a few years ago, there was an editorial by the editor who was really a dinosaur, and he attacked Rupert Sheldrake, and he said, every book that Rupert Sheldrake has written should be burned. Now, where have we heard that before? Where have we heard that before? But Rupert said that he sees the future of this relationship as one of great friendship and harmony and warmth that is progressively getting better. And then Cliff Matthews, the biochemist, brought to my attention a wonderful article from Science, the journal Science, 2 years ago called Science and God, a Warming Friend. So this relationship between science and religion is in process of changing, and the scientists themselves want to see a change. I mean, the ones that are truly open to it really want to see a change. They don't want to continue the institutionalization of the old antagonism, which of course the church started, right? The church started it. It's interesting about that the Galileo affair, and then the whole thing about the geocentrism, because I read something Panikar wrote remarking about that whole thing. And of course Panikar can be outrageous in some of the things he says, and he says them to be outrageous. But he said that at the time he felt the church was right, because Panikar is a scientist and he's a very radical thinker. He said at that time the church was right because culture was not prepared. The culture was not prepared for such a radical shift, psychologically, that you have to prepare the people for such a change of view, of cosmology. And I don't know, maybe he was right. And I remarked yesterday to Joel and Russ and others that even though there's been this change, the first Copernican revolution and the Galileo affair, there was this change from a purely geocentric view that the Earth is the center of the universe and thus man, human, to the view that the Earth is just one heavenly body, circulating the sun, trillions of them. That even though geocentrism went out with Galileo, or in that whole period, it has remained culturally because of our anthropocentrism, our emphasis on our species as the dominant species, that we have not gotten over our geocentrism. We still think we're the center. Now, today it's very common to have conferences, symposia, workshops, lectures, and books on this new relationship, and the focus of this conference is that relationship. And some of these books, the well-known ones are like Fred Allen Wolf's The Spiritual Universe. He's a quantum physicist, and he's part of the physicist dialogues, and he's a very colorful figure. And I would say he's also a mystic. But here's someone, a first-rate mind in physics, who's had so much mystical experience that he can write a book, The Spiritual Universe. And then, of course, some scientists would not like that. And then there's Ahmad Goswami, an Indian quantum physicist, who's created a new school in physics called Science Within Consciousness. And he explores that in a very important book by Tarcher called The Self-Aware Universe, How Consciousness Creates the Material Universe. And then there's Peter Russell's Global Brain, and Peter Russell himself doesn't have a global brain. That's his, maybe he does, that's his book. But he has a new book coming out, From Science to God, The Journey of a Devout Skeptic. And I recently had a couple long talks with him at a conference in California. He is also part of Synthesis, but he didn't come because of another engagement. But he wrote a really powerful essay for a booklet that we prepared for the participants called Synthesis Readings by Participants. And he wrote a very short piece and in which he demonstrates the mind-dependent nature of reality. And he sees science going infallibly in that direction, though it may take a while before that becomes the new paradigm. Then there's a wonderful trialogue. You know, there are hundreds of books. I'm just highlighting a few. There's a book called Belonging to the Universe, which is a trialogue, a three-way dialogue among Brother David Stavros, who's a Benedictine spiritual leader and a kind of cultural icon in the 60s. You know, when the Asian religions were coming to America, you would always see Brother David Stavros, Swami Satchidananda, Yogi Bhajan, and Rabbi Gilberman, you know, those people. And Pierre Valaikhan, so he goes back to those days. And so that's a three-way dialogue between Brother David Fridtjof Capra, the physicist, and Thomas Malthus, who is also a Benedictine monk. Then there's a brilliant book by Ken Wilber, The Marriage of Sense and Soul, which is a wonderful attempt to integrate science and spirituality, science and religion. And he did an earlier work, a work that he edited called Quantum Questions, the mystical writings of the world's great physicists. It's an important book because it demonstrates very clearly how the great minds in science are mystics. That they have seen beyond the scientific method. They realize how confining that is and that there are other ways of going. It's an important book. And of course, David Bohm's books are important, particularly Wholeness and the Implicate Order. That's a very important book. And of course, that book greatly upset Stephen Hawking. And Stephen Hawking, you know, has a problem with Bohm's mysticism. And in order to answer that, you know, I mean, David Bohm is was the first-rate mind in physics, and was Einstein's graduate assistant and wrote the first textbooks in quantum mechanics. But Stephen Hawking really resisted that kind of mystical tendency in Bohm and Einstein and all these others, and contemptuously hurled an ad hominem in the direction of David Bohm by saying, well, mysticism is for those who can't do the math. This is how I opened my book for Mystic Heart. But a friend of mine that was known to some of you, George Karams, when I told him that, he says, but mystics are people who don't have to do that. Isn't it? It's not true. And Stephen Hawking hasn't realized that yet. But you know what? He's slowly evolving because you know, he gave us an amazing presentation at the University of Chicago in February, which I went to, and I was very happy that it was projected on slides, because you know all his mathematical formulas were there, and there's so much mathematics. At least you could write down the equations. You could at least get a sense of it. You know, get some of it. And it was up there long enough and it was simple enough. I mean, his theory is simple enough. And one of the last things that he was emphasizing is that the anthropic principle, that the universe demands some form of the anthropic principle, that the universe is designed for consciousness. in some way. Okay, so that shows some progress. And I think Ken Wilber's book, The Marriage of Sense and Soul, Integrating Science and Religion, is going to be an important book. I mean, that's going to make that's going to have an effect. Now, earlier there was Fritjof Capra's The Tao of Physics, and many physicists have really criticized that. And Gary Zukav, similarly, his book, The Dancing Woo-Woo Masters. And some great physicists who are mystics criticize trying to validate mysticism, which doesn't need validation. It speaks for itself. It's so empirical. I mean, it's experiential. But they have criticized attempts to prove mysticism by appeal to the new physics as really a very slippery slope, because physics changes like the rest of science, and you don't want to have something as precious as the experience of the ultimate reality based on physics. Maybe the other way around. And then there's a beautiful little book, paperback, by Michael Talbert, called Mysticism and the New Physics. There are many, many others, but this particular book, I like it, but I think it's a little bit too biased to Tibetan Buddhism. I think that it needs to be more open to the other traditions, that mysticism is a common dimension of every tradition. In a very real sense, mysticism, I would say, since it's the origin of all great world religions, is the real religion, and not religion, which is a historical, sociological institutionalization of a revelation system. You know what I mean? It's carrying on the revelation that's given in the mystical experience. And so we need to be careful not to get too caught up in on the institutional level. It's got to serve the inner life, spiritual life, and within individuals and as those individuals work in community. So there is this decline of the primacy of the scientific method as the only way to the truth, but not a decline in the value of science and the contributions it makes to society and to our life and so forth and so on. I think also that it is possible that science can be a spiritual practice. And this is an idea I've been toying with. And the reason why I say that is because some scientists, in doing mathematics or, say, describing the properties of algae in some lake, or I don't want to say dissecting frogs because I'm really against vivisection and all that kind of stuff. But maybe, plant text, classifying plants and the nature of plants and or brain research or whatever, that they can get so drawn into the wonder of it, and they see the divine in what they're doing, and their desire for God and the spiritual life kind of converge in their practice, so their work, their passion becomes a spiritual practice, it becomes a form of prayer. And I think that's certainly true for cosmologists.
But he also did the PhD in astrophysics. He did a master's in divinity on the UC Smith University of Chicago. So here you have a mystic who's a scientist, and in doing his astronomy, it's like, again, this is like a revelation to astronomy. The deepest sense of the word revelation. So science can become a spiritual practice, but it depends on one's intention in doing that. Okay? And it's funny because Einstein himself said that the mystical has to be the basis of even science. And by that he means that incredible wonder where you're just open to the whole mystery of it all and the preciousness of it all.
and so excited by it all. It's as if you don't have the mystical, you're just as good as dead. If you don't have the mystical. And unfortunately, there are some scientists who like that. And people who aren't scientists. And that's a tragedy. Now, I was mentioning the first Copernican revolution and the whole Galileo thing here, but I wanted to mention the second Copernican revolution. And this is what is catching up to science today. It's taken a long time. The second Copernican revolution, it really occurs with the publication of Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. And with the Critique of Pure Reason, there's a radical shift to the importance of the knower. The person was knowing, and that's each one of us in this room. Every one of us that is conscious, that is aware, that is knowing. Kant is describing this reality of knowing in his Critique of Pure Reason. It's a work on human understanding, how we understand. It's a work in epistemology. What are the conditions for knowing? Okay? What do you have to bring to the act of knowing anything? What does the mind bring to the act of knowing? So with Kant, there is this radical shift from objectivity to subjectivity, to the knower, each one of us. And this is going to become very critical in science, particularly with relativity and quantum physics later. So what Kant showed is that in every perception that we have, there is a raw kind of data there. But the mind is creative in knowing. The mind organizes the perception through a number of categories. Space and time, relationship, tangibility, texture, whatever, and kind of qualities of color and shape and form and so forth and so on. So it kind of locates an object in space and time, a place, and then it kind of fills in certain qualities. And he calls this phenomenon, the phenomenal world, that we know phenomena, we know appearances of things. But Kant says we do not know noumena. We do not know what is behind what appears. So he's really saying there is no objectivity. All we really know is what our mind offers us in perception. Okay? Thanks. Okay. I can do that. So he says we don't know noumena. And then this has had a devastating effect in philosophy and has slowly been catching up in science. So this, he was in the late 18th century. And then Hegel came along and developed this further in phenomenology of spirit, or of Geist. But then this was completely misunderstood by Marx, who did not get the insight about objectivity, the fragility of objectivity. But with Einstein, science begins to catch up to Kant. And now one can say the primacy of consciousness, which began with Kant's realization, is now, it was glimpsed in Descartes, and maybe a bit in Spinoza, but it really is coming into awareness and focus with Einstein and the quantum physicists. And so now I think we're reaching a point where that's really beginning to get entrenched in a number of great visionary scientists. People like Peter Russell, Rudolf Sheldrake, all the great physicists, and Fred Ellenwold and Amit Goswami and a host of others. And I think you can divide scientists into two groups. Those who are aware of the primacy of consciousness and those that still believe in the fantasy of the ideal of pure objectivity. That, when they're perceiving the world, they're really in touch with the world totally there. And they don't seem to realize that that's a completely unverifiable opinion.
You cannot verify that, because look, that world that's out there, if you want to determine that that world actually exists independent of consciousness, then what you have to do is get outside of your consciousness, get out of the skin of awareness, and verify that it's there. But to do that, you must be aware. You can never do it. We can never get outside of our consciousness. And that's the point about the primacy of consciousness. So that makes materialism, atheism, all the reductionisms problematic. They can never get themselves established. They never could anyway, even if the world were objective. But with this kind of, we're imprisoned, and that's our grace and our curse. We're imprisoned in consciousness. But there is a withinness to consciousness, and that withinness is God, is the divine. And so I want to present this as the primacy of consciousness as the most important common ground between science and religion, or science and all the forms of spirituality, spiritual practice. All of the forms of mysticism presuppose the importance of consciousness. For instance, in the Christian tradition of mysticism, Eckhart, and particularly in the Rhineland school of mystics, there is a profound understanding of the place of the mind, of consciousness, of self-awareness in the relationship with the divine. And Eckhart once wrote, and I think it was one of his German sermons near the end, he said, "The eye by which I see God is the same eye by which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are the same eye, one in seeing, one in knowing, one in loving, one in being." That what he's saying, he doesn't mean the ocular faculty of sight, the eye. That's a metaphor for the pronoun I, which itself stands for or represents self-awareness. So what he's saying is that it is through self-awareness that God is aware of us and we are aware of God, and that the mystical journey occurs through the medium of our awareness, our self-awareness, which becomes really concentrated in the interior life, the inner life, the mystical life. And I love it how in the Hindu tradition, in the great sayings of that tradition called the Mahavakyas, they discovered thousands of years ago that God, Brahman, is consciousness. See? And the self, the eternal self, the Atma, is one with Brahman. And that eternal self dwells within the depths of our subjectivity, our consciousness. Atman is also consciousness. Okay? Once you come to the insight about consciousness, everything comes together. For science, with the shift to consciousness, all the contradictions in physics become harmonized. All the quantum puzzles become reconciled. And there is some conflict between relativity and quantum mechanics, particularly when you talk about black holes. But when you shift to the notion of subjectivity or consciousness, awareness as the basis, as I would say, that consciousness is the unified field that they've been looking for. They've been looking, the scientists have been looking, the theorists have been looking for how you integrate the four forces of nature: gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear force. They've been looking out there for it. But consciousness is the unifying field. And the ultimate level of that is God. And we share our consciousness with God. And if you want to prove of the existence of God, simply look at your awareness. The fact that you are conscious, that consciousness is God. That's what God is. That's what the Spirit is. That's what the divine is. But of course, in your awareness, you're only perceiving your little part of it at the moment. But that little part that you have, that awareness that you have, can open up and eventually take in the totality of consciousness, or the divine itself, and all the other realms of consciousness, and all beings that are aware, and all other species that are conscious and intelligent. So the primacy of consciousness. And I think that is real common ground. I can't elaborate that more, because I want to say a couple more things, and then have time for questions. How much time do we have?
About 10 minutes, Matt.
Okay, so 2 more minutes, and then we can have questions or comments. In terms of our identity as persons, if consciousness is absolute, let me propose to you a new definition of the self or the soul, or the identity of the person. The person is a community of consciousness individually assimilated and experienced. Each one of us is the community, this vast community of awareness, perceived through our own experience as a knower. Okay? We speak of the mystical body of Christ, that's what we're talking about, the church, the mystical church, or we speak of the interconnectedness of all sentient beings, that's what we're talking about. But in other words, there's one self, one Atman, one spirit, that is the basis of our selfhood. And I call that a community of consciousness. That's the spirit, that's the divine. And we are local awareness within a species consciousness. That consciousness is a vast field of awareness, and we're on one of the little fringes of it. But we have access to the totality through mystical experience, interpersonal love, relationship with nature and the cosmos, aesthetic experience, psychological experience, dream experience. We have many avenues to access that, and the spiritual journey is about growing in that awareness, and integrating it, and letting it animate our compassion, our love, our kindness, and our mercy. I think Ken Wilber is very useful in his notion of the 4 quadrants for enlarging our vision of the valid forms of knowing. And I think this is an incredible contribution to science and philosophy and spirituality. He speaks in the 4 quadrants. He has the upper 2, the left and right, and the lower 2. And the upper left quadrant is objective intentional. That's our consciousness, our individual consciousness, and all of our experience comes out of it. Then the lower quadrant is the intersubjective. That's between consciousnesses, the experiences that happen between them. What he calls the cultural, the other calls the individual. Then on the right side, the upper quadrant is the individual objective behavioral. In other words, yourself, your body in relationship to a society and family and friends and work and the whole objective world. And he calls that individual objective. Then the lower right quadrant he calls the social, the inter-objective. Okay? So that is what we do as a community and persons in relationship to everything else. I think this, to bring this in to science is very important, because it's saying to science that you cannot simply put the emphasis on experimentation in a laboratory or a microscope or a telescope. There's also the inner experience of persons, okay, the subjective experience, and that's valid, particularly if you look at it in the intersubjective realm, that if different people compare their experience, they're all having the same experience, there's some validity to it. And that's certainly true of mystical experience. Other areas of common ground, again, religion and science as complementary ways of knowing. They complete one another. They complete our knowledge. And then again, both spirituality and science can be a spiritual practice as well as the arts. And then another area of common ground are the critical issues the planet faces. That ecology, war and peace, poverty, the gap between the rich and the poor, these are all issues, and education, and human rights and the rights of species. These are issues that religious people and scientists are concerned about. That there's one world which has all these problems, and we all must have some sort of relationship to them. Or what the Dalai Lama, His Holiness says, we have a universal responsibility, each one of us, for these critical issues, as individuals and as communities. And so the religions, the religious and spiritual people and scientists have a universal responsibility together to do something to impact these problems. So these areas show the possibility and the promise of partnership. And I would also add, and this is something for you to think about, there is spirituality in science, and there is science in spirituality. Just think about that. Take that home with you. There is spirituality in science, and there is science in spirituality. There are many instances of that. And again, mysticism itself is highly empirical, highly experiential, more so than even science, because science can be very abstract from what it is observing. So I think they can work together, and I think that much fruit for the world can happen. One last thing I want to say, I'd like you to think about is this. The models we have in science, as we have in religion or economics or political life, are only as good as the metaphors that back them up. Okay? And all the models in science are based on metaphors of sight. Okay? So what does that tell you? We don't have any models based on the metaphor of touch, of taste, of sound. Therefore, our knowledge is so incomplete. And Spinoza tells us that God has an infinite number of attributes, and we human beings know only two of them, thought or consciousness, and extension, or the universe, the material world. So we know very little. We have a long way to go. I'm going to stop there, and then we'll have a few.
One significant fact I did not mention that you may be quite interested in is this book by Wayne, The Mystic Heart, just was published this past week, and we have copies here, but it would explore these ideas in much greater detail than we had a chance to present here today.
Yeah, this book, I should say, can you hear this? Thank you. Because this book is not like this, actually. This book is a practical work in spirituality from the universal context. Although chapter 3 does get into consciousness issues, this is not a primarily philosophical work. It's a work to help people in their practical spiritual lives within a kind of interfaith, interspiritual context. So any comments, questions, insights, debates? Go ahead. I got one round.
Could you say something about the connection between what you've been saying and compassion?
Oh yeah, certainly. I have a lot to say about compassion in the book.
Good afternoon. Oh my God, oh my God. Verily I invoke thee and supplicate before thy threshold, asking thee that all thy mercies may descend upon these souls. Specialize them for thy favor and thy truth. O Lord, unite and bind them together. Join in accord all the souls, and exhilarate the spirits through the signs of thy sanctity and oneness. O Lord, make these faces radiant through the light of thy oneness. Strengthen the loins of thy servants in the service of thy kingdom. O Lord, thou possessor of infinite mercy, O Lord of forgiveness and pardon, forgive our sins, pardon our shortcomings, and cause us to turn to the kingdom of thy clemency, invoking the kingdom of might and power, humble at thy shrine, and submissive before the glory of thine evidences. O Lord God, Make us as the waves of the sea, as flowers of the garden, united, agreed through the bounties of thy love. O Lord, dilate the breast through the signs of thy oneness, and make all mankind as stars shining from the same height of glory, as perfect fruits growing upon the tree of thy life. Verily, thou art the Almighty, the self-subsistent, the giver, the forgiving, the pardoner, the omniscient, the one creator.
I would like to invite Ken Wells of the Buddhist community to please come forward.
This is a privileged position here for a moment. 250 faces of world peace. Let's go look for it in meditation. Your own wisdom clarity is this. Your own natural radiance is
Representing Christianity, Reverend Daniel Meter.
In your packets is a screen, back of your booklets, representing Christianity. It's a prayer that we sing together. And this comes from my own tradition of singing the Psalms of the Old Testament, the songs of Israel. And the tune might be familiar to some of you. And if you know the tune, I invite you to sing with me. Don't worry about singing loud. Don't worry about singing fast. You can sing quietly and with reflection, or you can simply listen. And let me sing the first stanza, and then you can join with me on the next. Show us, O Lord, your steadfast love, and let your saving grace be near to those who turn their hearts to him. The Lord speaks peace, and I will hear. To everyone who worships him, his saving help is very near. His purpose is that in our land his radiant glory may appear. Mercy and truth at last have met. Justice and peace are reconciled. Truth has arisen from the earth. Justice looked down from heaven and smiled. The Lord will grant prosperity. Our land will yield its full increase. Justice shall go before the Lord. The pathway for his feet is peace.
Representing Hinduism, I would like to invite Fred Stella.
When I was first asked to do this, the way it was put to me actually was, could you do a ritual? They didn't use the word prayer. And so I said, okay, I'm sure I can come up with something. Now, I'm very sensitive to the fact that some people, because of their tradition, because of their conscience, cannot take part in a ritual that is not of their own religion. So I want to make it very clear that I'm not looking for complete group participation on this. If any of you are drawn to participate with me, I would ask you to do so. If you cannot or wish not to, I would ask that you simply sit quietly and think of peace and healing. What we're going to do is a yogic healing technique. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a prayer and then rub the hands together. And you can do this along with me. By rubbing the hands together and feeling that consciousness, that energy that is within us become alive. We're actually gathering energy, that this consciousness, this energy that pervades the universe, we're trying to get just a little bit of that. And then we will chant Om and spread the hands, and of course, be careful not to poke somebody's eye out. And just we descend. We'll chant for the healing of body, mind, souls, and ultimately world peace. And I'd like to take this opportunity just to let you know, I'm sure everybody here has heard of the word Om, and they know that, well, Hindus chant it or yogis chant it when they meditate. Well, what is it? Actually, Brother Teasdale gave an excellent explanation without ever using the word. That consciousness which he talked about, which pervades the entire universe and is within us, that in effect is Om. So first I'll pray. Heavenly Father, Mother, friend, beloved God, Thou art omnipresent. Thou art in all Thy children. Manifest Thy healing presence, first in their bodies. That's beautiful. In their minds. In their souls. And finally, keeping the hands upraised, let us chant Om, invoking peace, harmony, brotherhood, the justice that inspires that peace, harmony, and brotherhood throughout all nations, to all sentient beings. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om.
I would like to invite, and I apologize, I did not get the pronunciation of this name, Nitin Bhimani. Please come forward.
Namaste. I bow to the godliness in each of you individually. This will be an extension of the Omkar as recited previously. In Jain tradition, Om, Omkar represents universe. And the kind of universe that we would pray is in a mantra. Shivam astu sarva jagatah parahita nirta bhavantu bhuta gunaha doshaha prayantu nasham sarvatra sukhin bhavantu lokaha. What kind of a universe? Shivam astu, that the whole universe may be at bliss, at peace. And parahita nirata bhavantu bhutaganaha, that all the living beings are engaging to help each other. And the same living beings try to help each other overcome others' shortcomings, so that the whole universe is at bliss and at peace. And the final prayer is Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. In English, that is complete. The universe full. This is complete, full. From fullness comes fullness. When fullness is taken from fullness, fullness alone remains. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Representing the Jewish community, Len Robinson and Jeremy Voorhees. I would invite them to come forward.
Sim shalom tova uvracha, chen v'chesed v'rachamim, aleinu ve'akol Yisrael, amecha, baruch atah Adonai, oseh shalom. Grant us peace, your most precious gift, O eternal source of peace, and give us the will to proclaim its message to all the peoples of the earth. Bless our country, that it may always be a stronghold of peace, and its advocates among the nations. May contentment reign within its borders, health and happiness within its homes. Strengthen the bonds of friendship among the inhabitants of all lands, and may the love of your name hallow every home and every heart. Blessed is the eternal God, the source of peace. From the ancient times, Jews have been called together to pray through the sound of the shofar. It is blown especially at Rosh Hashanah and then again at the end of Yom Kippur, which is a time when we draw together and make peace with God, we make peace with ourselves, and we make peace with every other human being. It reminds us of our destiny to be the children of God. It reminds us that God is our ruler, and it foreshadows a time when all people will acknowledge that we are one and that God is one. The first sound calls us into our hearts to remember what kind of person that we should be. Takiya. The second sound of the shofar is Shavarim. It asks us to think of our past, our present, and our future. Shavarim. The third sound of the shofar is Truah. It is a series of short notes that remind us to remember the small, little things in our life, like family, friends, community, pets, and even flowers. Truah. And finally, we put all those notes together. Just as God has many names, God's name is one. And as we are many people, there will be a time when we shall be one. So we put all the sounds together as a final blast of the shofar. Takiya Gedula.
Aliyah Lalani and Feiruz Kamal. I invite you to come forward.
Assalamu alaikum, which means peace be upon you. That's the Arabic Islamic greetings. Thank you. The sister next to me here is going to tell you the English readings. I will read it to you in the authentic language, the Arabic, from the Quran, the Holy Quran. The selection has been selected by Sister Ghazala Munir, who happens to be another Muslim sister of mine. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألم تر أن الله يسبح له من في السماوات والأرض والطير صافات كل قد علم صلاته وتسبيحه والله عليم بما يفعلون ولله ملك السماوات والأرض وإلى الله المصير ألم تر أن الله يزجي سحابا يؤلف بينه وثم يجعله ركاما وترى الودق يخرج من خلاله ثم ينزل من السماء ومن الجبال فيها من برد فيصيب من يشاء ويصرفه عمن يشاء يكاد سنا برقه يذهب بالأبصار يقلب الليل والنهار إن في ذلك لعبرة لأولي الأبصار يقلب الله الليل والنهار إن في ذلك لعبرة لأولي الأبصار والله خلق كل دابة من ماء فمنهم من يمشي على بطنه ومنهم من يمشي على رجلين ومنهم من يمشي على 4 يخلق الله ما يشاء إن الله على كل شيء قدير لقد أنزلنا آيات مبينات والله يهدي من يشاء إلى صراط مستقيم صدق الله العظيم.
In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. See it that thou It is God who praises all beings in the heavens and on earth do celebrate, and the birds of the air with wings outspread. Each one knows its own mode of prayer and praise, and God knows well all that they do. You, to God belongs, the dominion of the heavens and the earth, and to God is the final goal of all. Seest thou not that God makes the clouds move gently, then joins them together, and makes them into a heap? Then wilt thou see rain issue forth from the mist. And then he sends down from the sky mountain masses of clouds, wherein is his hail. He strikes there when he pleases, and he turns away from whom he pleases. The vivid flash of his lightning well nigh blinds the sight. It is God who alternates the night and day. Verily in these things is an instructive example for those who have a vision. And God has created every animal from water. Of them are some that creep on their bellies, some that walk on 2 legs, and some that walk on 4. God creates what he wills, for verily God has power over all things. We have indeed sent down signs that make things manifest, and God guides whom he wills to a way that is straight. Amen.
I would like to invite the representatives from the Ottawa Chippewa community, Louis and Evie Sauerplatte.
We have passed through the yellow spring, the red heat of summer, and we are right now at this moment passing through the doorway from the black of autumn into the white of the spiritual realm. It is time for us to go inward. It is time for us to get in touch with that which is within us and which gives us life. It has been our time to go through the 4 quarters of our life. This is the ending time and the time of new beginning. Grandfather, you who watch over us, you see what we do here. You see that we are seeking now to close the hoop of life for this year and prepare for yet another year. This is the time for us to speak to our ancestors and those who have gone before us. It is the time for us to look inward. Help us now to close the hoop so that all those who are around us, all our friends, of whatever species, whether they crawl, or whether they walk, or they run, or fly, or swim, we ask all our brothers and sisters to come and join with us now as in this community of life. And may we close the circle in a good way, knowing always that it is time now for us to stand with our heads high to our full height and gather ourselves together and walk and close this circle. Miigwech.
I would like to invite the representatives of the Sikh community to come forward. Priya Baga and
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I'm going to recite a hymn written by our 5th Guru of the Sikhs, Guru Arjan Dev Ji. The meaning of this is, I live by listening to his name, God's name. When I turn to him, all I seek is accomplished.
Is there a representative here from the Zarathustra community? I don't believe so. I think they were unable to make it today. As a way, it seems fitting to end this time of prayer for world peace, to take just a moment and extend peace to one another. And then, since we have a little bit of extra time, I thought maybe, Wayne, would you like to take a couple of more questions? Sure. So why don't we extend peace to those around you, and then after about a minute, we'll put Wayne back up here.
Any comments or questions or anybody? Yes, Fred.
Well, you were talking about the laws of physics changing. We know this, but we know this today. In Eastern spirituality, there's many teachers, of course, who talk about the fact, or theory, we're going to put it, that quantum physics is sort of proving the idea of the Vedantic universe. So does that mean that we can't get too cocky because those rules could change on us later on?
And see, that was Einstein's point, that he felt that it's a mistake to try and prove mysticism through physics or any other science, because scientific views are mutable, they're constantly changing, you know. And Sir Martin Rees, who's one of the foremost cosmologists of our time, he's at Cambridge. We're in the same department as Stephen Hawking. He's got a book out called Before the Beginning, Our Universe and Others, and he's a proponent of what is called the multiverse, or many universes. And one of the things that, of course, this is purely theoretical, but one of the points about the multiverse, if other universes exist, the laws, the physical laws of those universes are not the same as ours. But the laws of physics are contextual to the universe in question. So that really means that science is not capable of attaining absolute truth. You know, so, yes?
From what I've read of the writings of Christian mystics and a little bit of I'm supposed to eat this? And I don't know Jewish or Sufi mysticism that well, but there seems to be a delicate balance between the sense of absolute unity with God and, at least in the writing of Christian mystics, an insistence on absolute separateness from God, that we are made by God, that we are not God. The way you have adapted the mystical tradition, it seems to me you're losing the second of those. Are you not saying that we are God, and in the sense that we make God as much as God makes us, and there really is no longer a
No, not quite the same. It's like Eckhart also has a saying. He says, you are God, and she is God, and he is God, and I am God, but God is not you or she or me. Or, in other words, ontologically, essentially, we are totally rooted in the divine reality. We cannot exist apart from that reality. We lean on the divine to be. And if I put it in Christian terms, I would say the relationship would be like this. As the persons of the Trinity are related to each other, so are we related to God. It's that intimate. Or in the Quran it says, Allah is closer to us than our jugular vein, which is a more poetic way of saying what St. Augustine said, that the divine is more intimate to us than we are to ourselves. Why? Because everything is really happening in God. And that's what is called, the mystics often speak of this, and this is what is called panentheism, not pantheism, where the divine's transcendence is exhausted in the immanence of the universe, but panentheos, everything is within God, everything is within God's consciousness, everything is intimate to God, and God is intimate to everything else. But there is this unity, but there are distinctions within the unity, and we are some of those distinctions. And furthermore, St. Thomas Aquinas remarked that each one of us is an eternal idea in God's mind. Though we had a beginning in time, we have eternally existed in the divine mind. And what exists in the divine mind is not just an idea. It has a life. it exists in a fuller sense than an idea in our mind. So that's another sense in which we are God. Now, if you go to the Hindu tradition, Upanishadic mysticism, and one of the great utterances, there are four great statements that the Hindu mystical tradition makes, the Upanishadic mysticism. Brahman is consciousness, Atman is Brahman, that art thou, meaning we are that, and aham brahmasmiti, I am Brahman. But if you see the context of that statement in the Upanishads, it refers to God's self-awareness itself, that the mystic reaches a vibrational level of attunement with the divine that, in a sense, overhears the consciousness of God, if I may extend that metaphor of hearing, that the mystic is privy to God's consciousness. And there aren't the words to express this, but kind of hears God's self-awareness of, I am Brahman. Do you know what I'm saying? God's self-awareness, God's self-consciousness is aham brahmasmiti, I am Brahman. And the mystic is so one with God that the mystic shares in that consciousness. So it sounds like identity, but pure identity, but I don't think it is. Because if it were pure identity, you couldn't even say that. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, but is that consciousness that you tune into or share or participate in, is that consciousness the consciousness of a being distinct from myself?
Yes and no. And that, yes and no, and that really, again, is the tradition of Advaita, non-duality. Incidentally, the Buddhists have a very profound insight about this when they say that there's a distinction between absolute truth and relative truth. All mystical truth is absolute truth, which means it's unitive and non-dual. Dualistic truth is relative. Okay? And so, yes and no, in this sense, in Advaita, in the tradition of non-duality in Hinduism, and there are 6 classical schools of non-duality or of Advaita, of kind of interpretations of it, and many contemporary schools. But non-duality, Advaita, that unitive consciousness, this relationship between the person and the divine, is not two and not one, which is a way of saying that it's ontologically one, and yet you have a certain distinction, a certain, you maintain a certain integrity of your own awareness in relationship to it. Not two and not one. But again, think of the analogy to the Trinity. As the persons are related to each other in unity, we are related to the divine unity. So I think there is distinction, but we're in the same family, if you will. And I think a lot of the identity proclamations, like in Sufism, one of the Sufis will say, in these robes is only Allah, and they want to burn him at the stake, you know, because it seems to transgress against the transcendence of Allah. But all mystical language is paradoxical, and it's most of it, except some in the Hindu tradition, where they had developed a language, is drawn from everyday experience, and that's very dualistic. Now, in the Indian tradition, they developed Sandhya Bhasha, this profound language, I think goes back to the rishis, which is a purely spoken language. It's non-dual, and it's meant only to talk about their relationship with the divine. And you can't learn that language in some school of Eastern thought, you know, Eastern studies. You can't learn this language. You can only learn it if you're one of them. But we in the West have not been that serious that we've actually developed our own language. Well, yes.
You mentioned,
you get into privilege of the chair. Go ahead.
You mentioned about our consciousness as abilities. You also mentioned about an expanded state of consciousness.
Yes.
Are there specific tools of getting from here to there?
Yes, absolutely. And every tradition speaks of them. You know, the contemplative tradition of every spiritual path. Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, it has so many different technologies for actualizing some of those capacities, like in the dream, to be conscious in dream state, or to be aware, fully aware and in possession of your awareness when you die, and to make those decisions you must make during the death process, or to develop compassion, or to be aware of subtle realms, And then in the Christian tradition alone, there are something like 50,000 books, treatises, since the first century, written on mystical subjects. And the greatest Christian scholars don't know more than 250 to 300 of them. This is a wealth of experience that we hardly know. And the same is true of Sufism, and certainly of the Hindu tradition. Another fantasy, because now Tibetan Buddhism is so much in vogue, you hear certain Tibetan Buddhist scholars put down the Hindu tradition and say, oh, they lost it. That's nonsense. Everything that is in Buddhism is first in Hinduism. And if you take the time to explore, you'll find that's true. And so this kind of one-upmanship is, in the interfaith movement, we have to really put that aside. It's a community of religions, a community of communities, and we complete one another's understanding. I would say that's also true in the Christian tradition, the Jewish mysticism, that those same parallel insights, those same states of awareness are present. And then another point, just quickly, and then I'll turn it over to Russ, because he had something to say. We were talking about consilience. I was pretty hard on that. I wanted to say that if you find the whole brain in one cell, what you're referring to is the holographic model. And I think if you think through that model is profoundly spiritual. Its implications are profoundly spiritual. And the point about trying to dissect the brain and try to reduce consciousness to the brain is you are assuming that very thing that you're trying to disprove, namely consciousness. You're using consciousness to try and reduce consciousness to parts of the brain. It doesn't work. And another thing, the intelligence that we see on every level of life, even in chaos theory, which is a much more subtle form of order, all of that order is not so much, I think this is what we're going to find out, that order, that design in the universe on the macro level, on the microscopic level, on the subatomic level, is not so much an intelligence that is put into nature, but it is the intelligence of nature itself, because nature is aware. The universe is aware. And when we're looking at the universe, we're looking at consciousness. Okay? We're looking at consciousness in an objective mode. And we have to look at it non-dualistically. That what we're looking at out there is also, as in the Hindu tradition says, is within us. It's within our awareness. And I think that's really the point. You had...
Mary.
Okay.
Sort of like political parties, we cede to one another. Before we close, and we're going to close, Mo Kleiman is going to lead us in a closing prayer. We're moving now, as soon as Mo has completed his prayer, back over to the other space. There is more food, and we do want to begin promptly at 3 o'clock. So make your choices among those difficult choices, and try to get to your room by 3 so we can begin at 3. The Havdalah service, which we are closing the whole day with, will not be here, but it will be over there in 316. So we won't be coming back to this space. Except for one presentation. At 4 o'clock, we'll be in this space. Excuse me.
Can you all hear me? Okay. Take the page Oseh Shalom, if you will. I'm going to chant it through, and then I will repeat it, and hope that as many of you as can will join me in chanting it, because the transliteration is the second line. By the way, this is the last line of our Kaddish, which is said in the services a couple of times. It's near the end of each section of our daily and Sabbath services. So we close with this as part of our services. And today is Shabbat, so I will do a Shabbat formula. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, amen. Ya'aseh shalom, Ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, Ya'aseh shalom, Ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen, ve'imru amen, ve'imru amen, ve'imru amen. Now I'll repeat it, and there are some of us out there who know this, so join me and help me a lot. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, amen. Ya'aseh shalom, Ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, Ya'aseh shalom, Ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen, ve'imru amen, ve'imru amen, ve'imru amen. Shabbat shalom.